Right. So I've been covering the refugee crisis and the treatment of said people coming here to seek asylum for a while now. I've done a number of videos on this, on different aspects of the issue. And although I feel totally justified in doing so, too often the narrative regarding such people in mainstream papers is negative, not highlighting their actual plight until things get pretty severe for them. Attacks by the fash in their hotels, for example, the concentration camps, never what they're actually running away from or trying to leave behind them, seeking a better life here for, cramming them onto old barges even now and the like. But the root cause of all of this is obviously the Tory government. The Tories have long been regarded as racist, not uniquely, but usually more so than other parties. It comes from being right-wing. The people attacking refugees in hotels are Patriotic Alternative. They are hard right. The likes of Britain First, also hard right. Paul Golding and his ilk always attacking people of colour. Golding is himself standing in the local elections in Kent, apparently asking anyone of colour when he knocks on their door, not for their vote, but asking whether or not they actually belong here. Many of them were born here, Paul, and for most sensible folk, a damn sight more welcome on my doorstep than you would ever be. Now, although they're the extreme right wing, the Tories fall into their side of the Overton window too, arguably to a lesser extent, but that largely depends on the individual concerned. It's been an interesting tactic that we've seen in recent years, however, that with the exception of Grant Shapps holding the post for all of 1 week under Liz Truss last October, the Home Secretary post has been a person of colour consistently all the way back as far as April of 2018. Amber Rudd, of course, falling on her sword at that point to save Theresa May's bacon over the disastrous situation concerning the Windrush Generation, those lost boarding cards, people who had built their lives here, visiting family back in the Caribbean, all of a sudden finding themselves stuck there, unable to return. They were barred from doing so. Tory racism, it struck again. I can't help but think the appointment of Sajid Javid to the post as her successor, a British Pakistani, was to try and bury some of that bad feeling over the scandal amongst the British populace. Javid was a former investment banker at Deutsche Bank. His experience would be more in keeping with the Treasury than the Home Office, you would think. But he's hardly going to turn down a gig in one of the great offices of state, is he? This made him the first British Asian to hold the post, and he stayed on until Theresa May was replaced by Boris Johnson, much further to the right than May, as he is, and he replaced Javid with Priti Patel, much further to the right, it can be argued, than Javid, who now became Chancellor, the de facto number 2 in government. So it was a promotion for him at the end of the day. Now, I say Patel is more to the right than Javid. It is all academic, many of you might think, but my justification for that was that Javid resigned rather than sack his own advisors on the demands of Johnson's then remote control operator, Dominic Cummings. I don't think Patel would bat an eyelid over throwing underlings under a bus. She was, after all, investigated for bullying, got found wanting by the then ethics advisor. Johnson kept her on despite those findings because he is completely amoral, as we all know, and the then ethics advisor quit instead. Said a lot. Now, Priti Patel, British-born of Ugandan Indian descent, became the next Home Secretary of colour, and under her, the migrant attacks really ramped up. The original plans to deport refugees to Rwanda were drawn up by her, and of course, her successor, Suella Braverman, has only expanded upon that, throwing even more money at it. And she, herself, being British-born of Kenyan and Mauritian descent. And if anything, the racism issue has only ramped up even further once she became Home Secretary, as if she saw it as some kind of a competition to out-nasty Priti Patel. Now, I've spoken on a number of videos how I cannot fathom how, particularly where it comes to Patel and Braverman, how people of their ancestry, people of colour themselves, how they can be so hell-bent and determined to pull up the ladder behind them of people fleeing all manner of disaster, choosing to come here for whatever reason. That's their own case to make in their own asylum applications, not for us to prejudge. But why, in the case of these two former and current Home Secretaries, is the desire to bar other people of colour from the opportunities their parents had in coming here? Both Patel and Braverman's parents were economic migrants, the sort they demonise most of all now, especially when every single asylum seeker coming here and successfully making their claim for asylum by Patel and Braverman's own standards have a better case for coming here than their parents did. Different times, of course, but the point still stands, in my opinion. Calling them racist, though, calling people of colour, as Patel and Braverman are, as well as any other Tory of colour, racist. You can drag Rishi Sunak into this equation as well at this point. Himself of Punjabi descent, he keeps Braverman in post after all. In fact, he restored her to that post of Home Secretary after she resigned over a breach of the ministerial code, such as her incompetence. People have referred often to the policies they've introduced as racist, but rarely have I seen the ministers themselves, being people of colour as they are, clearly pointed to and called, "You're a racist." Maybe it's because we're still a white-dominated society, or we still have that white-dominated thinking. Maybe there's been so much accusation over racism in recent years, publicised far more heavily when aimed at the left in society, who certainly will have their racists amongst them, sure. It's a societal ill, not exclusively a right-wing issue, though I would argue it's predominantly more on show there, since as our media have proven in recent years, they're more likely to attack the left than the right, because most of the media is itself right-wing. There's that inherent bias there, that weaponisation of the issue. That's an argument for another time, though. But maybe as a white dominant society, we've become a little nervous about calling it out in people of colour for fear it'll reflect badly on ourselves. Perhaps I'm just as guilty of this as anyone else, and I'm someone who was refused, I thought, to hold my tongue when it came to calling out racism, and especially calling out the weaponisation of it. I have no problem whatsoever calling Israel an apartheid state, and indeed I'm backed up by such opinions in that by the likes of such as Amnesty International, even as our political class continue to deny such things and accuse anyone of doing that of being an anti-Semite. Though, of course, criticism of Israel is not an attack on all people of the Jewish faith. The two are not the same, and so such provocation, as far as I'm concerned, falls on deaf ears. I appreciate that others, having been attacked for holding such views, do get cowed into silence by it, though. Such is the point of that criticism. But as a white man, pointing to two brown-skinned women, as Patel and Braverman are, and calling them racist, does carry with it a certain uncomfortability. Maybe it's because we are, or maybe I'm right in thinking that we're this white dominant society and we have that white dominance thinking. Maybe it's the privilege I have as a white man, that white privilege, that makes it an uncomfortable thing to do, to think about. That's how I feel. I'd certainly be interested in others' thoughts on that in the comments, but on the other hand, are we not letting down the very people of colour, as a great many asylum seekers are, if we don't call government policy what it is, and actually is the racism already being called out by other people of colour? Yet their voices are drowned out because our media isn't listening to them. Well, somebody who has got their voice heard on this very issue, for a change, is Sajid Javid, the former chair of the Conservative Party, herself Yorkshire-born of Pakistani descent, who has recently called out Suella Braverman's language and rhetoric directly. She has spoken out on the fact that she's become so alarmed by the racist language used by Suella Braverman, to the point she's asked her father to no longer walk back from the mosque on his own, that she's arranged transport for him. She's told her son if people start shouting and swearing at him to walk away. And she has especially laid into Braverman over her comments that, without caveat, British Pakistani men were mostly responsible for grooming white British girls to be used in child abuse networks, right after a grooming gang of all white members got sent down for over 130 years between them. It's notable, if I refer back to Sajid Javid for a moment as well, how silent he's been as a British Pakistani man on this issue, unlike, for example, GMB presenter Adil Ray, also of British Pakistani descent, who has faced much racist backlash because of his outspokenness. I wonder if Javid is himself afraid to speak out. Has he been cowed into silence? It does make you wonder, especially since he's leaving politics at the next election, doesn't really have anything to lose politically at this point by speaking out. Marcy also mentions Sunak, who she says she doesn't think shares Braverman's extreme views, but herein lies the rub with Sunak. He's kept her in cabinet, restored her to her post at Home Secretary within days of her resignation when he became the new Tory leader, and he did that for no other reason than to keep the ERG on side, the hard right rump of his party, that currently have so much clout and are responsible for so much of the extremism we've seen in government in recent years. Braverman is one of them. Racism be damned, Sunak has his own position to consider. That's what I think. I can't rationalise him keeping her there for any other reason. The latest example of Braverman's rhetoric was to criticise the police attending a pub that had gollywogs on display, awful racist objects that they are, and Braverman berated the waste of police time. A hate crime is a hate crime, no matter how trivial it may seem to some, but trust her to be the one to pass public comment on what ordinarily wouldn't have made mainstream national news, and then it became such. Varsi isn't the only Tory calling out Braverman's racism either. However, she does seem to be the only one prepared to be publicly named. Others have apparently called Braverman a real racist bigot, and another has made the comment that the Conservative Party's reputation on discrimination has dropped to a whole new low. A new low. So they even admit themselves they are discriminatory then. At least on the quiet, anonymously, they do anyway. Again, reinforcing that belief that it's wrong or unseemly for people of colour to be called racist in and of themselves, when every other day, it seems, Braverman is the one who gives us a reason to. There are, of course, those who would rather scare people into silence still. GB News have run a piece attacking Sajid Javid and accusing her of being an anti-Semite, completely deflecting. Yet you know they'd never run a piece on her if she hadn't spoken out against a hard-right minister, such a hard-right news/not news channel as they are, that they adore. It strikes me that if the few that call this out, the likes of Sajid Javid, the likes of Adil Ray, are going to be attacked as they have been for speaking truth, then it's time the rest of us stopped being scared to do likewise. You don't have to like either of these people to get where they're coming from. It's the position of what is right and just, and more of us need to perhaps get over these hang-ups. I admit to this being difficult and call a racist because we're not combating racism if we're just restricting ourselves to calling out the white ones, are we? That's white privilege too. We owe it to people of colour in our society to call those out that are racist amongst their demographics, like Braverman for being guilty of it too. We're a multicultural society and we have to take a multicultural approach to such things. Thanks for watching. If you appreciated this video, please do hit like and subscribe, leave a comment and hit the notification bell too so you don't miss the next one. Also look out for me on social media and other interesting stuff by clicking on the Linktree link in the comments below, and I will see you next time. Cheers, folks.